Hey, Rags here. Poodle on the streets, Mastiff in the sheets. Did you guys know that there's a channel out there called Exclusively Games? Well, if you did, good on you. You get 5 doggo dollars, redeemable locations to be announced. But if you didn't know about them, then you do now, which means that you have no excuse for not subscribing to them. And you should, because every week I do a short video game review there. A review that's exclusive to that channel and can't be found anywhere else. So if you want my thoughts on some games like Vermintide 2, Dusk, Risk of Rain 2, and others, you now have that opportunity. Help support the channel as it grows. Do it. They're doing good work over there. Anyway, today's video is based on something that I found through a channel that I watch sometimes called Heel vs. Babyface, and a channel that I would recommend if you're looking for some commentary on gaming stuff. Go check them out, show them some love, no homo. On March the 7th, at Medium, Electronic Arts released a piece called What Inclusion Means to Players. I think it's dumb, but let's take a look at just what they said. What Inclusion Means to Players by Jenny Shih, EA Global Analytics and Insights. I was in middle school when Super Smash Bros. Came out on N64. To say that I loved this game would be an understatement. I loved the characters, Kirby was my main, the maps, the thrill of the competition, all of it. So, when my local Blockbuster announced they were hosting a Smash tournament, I was excited to show off my skills and meet others who loved Smash as much as I did. This was my first gaming event, and it turned out to be a pivotal experience in my life, as a gamer, and in my career. Jenny is one of us guys. She's a cool gamer. Yeah, she became part of the most reviled, hated, and anti-consumer corporation in the entire industry, which, if what other companies do is anything to go by, a very coveted title these days. But she's one of us. She's a gamer. She loves games. It's great. I had spent weeks before the event perfecting my combos and was ready to take on the competition. As the event got started, one of the guys in the crowd smirked at me and said, "Get out of here. Girls don't game." Nyeh. I'll never forget how much his words stung as his buddies laughed at me. I glanced around and noticed that I was the only girl there. Feeling out of place, like somehow because I was a female I had less of a right to be there, I stood up to leave. That's when I heard another voice say, "Let her play!" I could see that the clear and assertive voice belonged to a guy at the back of the room whose blue baseball cap bobbed far above the crowd. That shut up the bullies quick. And then all of the other people there stared at him, and they all began to clap. The misogynist bullies ran out of the store crying, and everyone in the Blockbuster lifted me up on their shoulders and cheered. What an incredible win for inclusion and representation, I thought to myself in my 11-year-old brain. And then we heard the news on the television that Hillary Clinton won the election and we were tearing down the southern border of our country. And that's my asshole way of saying that I don't believe you. Even though I got knocked out of the first match, it didn't matter. I was incredibly happy to be there and play my favorite game with others who loved it too. To the guy in the baseball cap, my 11-year-old self was too shy to mention, but thank you for being one of the reasons why I'm a huge gamer today. Yeah, imagine you're that guy and you read this, and you realize that what you did, ending up leading this chick to becoming a part of Electronic Arts, the galactic empire of video games, I bet you'd feel very proud. And, I mean, that's assuming this happened, and I don't think it did, because I don't believe the suits who work at EA. Rule of thumb, anything that EA says is a lie, until proven otherwise. You think you walk in for the job interview at Electronic Arts and they're like, "Yeah, how honest are you?" In fact, I love gaming so much that I made a career out of it. Wait, you love gaming, but you work at Electronic Arts. That's like saying, "I love cows. That's why I work at the slaughterhouse, so I can be around them all day." With a background in market research, I joined EA's Global Consumer Insights team 2 years ago, where my role is to help better understand player opinions and attitudes through research, online surveys, focus groups, and interviews. Dear God, your job must be depressing. I mean, first off, you don't exactly need a college degree to understand why people hate EA's guts so much. But man, day in and day out, coming to terms with the fact that you work for a company that's more reviled than the plague? Man, this must literally be what it's like to be Thanos' PR manager. I recently led a research study that aims to better understand what players think about representation, diversity, and inclusion in gaming. Instead of just fucking going to YouTube? An especially relevant topic across the entertainment and tech industries today, I want to share what we learned for two main reasons. First, in the hope that the information can be valuable to any game creator who wants to build experiences that players will love and appreciate. Oh god, no, not this. Dear god, if you make games, ignore this shit. Just make fucking good games, please, dear lord. Just make good, meaningful games with interesting characters and fun mechanics, and don't slap it full of microtransactions and other bullshit like that. It's really simple. Just make a good game, dear lord. And second, to give a voice to the many players who want to see themselves and their identities represented in video games, people like my 11-year-old self, who want to play, but don't always feel included in the gaming community. Alright, yeah, this one sounds kinda like it's coming in from out of nowhere. The story you told, that nobody believes by the way, was that you didn't feel included because you were a girl. That's what your story was. It had absolutely nothing to do with the characters that were in the game. They probably didn't want you around because you were 11. And I don't want 11-year-old girls around me. Or 11-year-old boys either. Or just 11-year-olds. You paint this as, they didn't want me to be around because I was a girl. And the characters in the game seemed completely and totally irrelevant to that. But if it's not irrelevant, if the representation issue with in-game characters is a problem, then what stopped you as an 11-year-old girl from loving video games? You seem to love them regardless of what the race, gender, or fuck preference was of the game's roster. And this kind of mirrors my own experiences as a pup when I fell in love with video games as well. I didn't care if the protagonist was male or female, or black or white. Those were all superficial. They were practically irrelevant aspects of the game. But I wanted to get some extra opinions. So I texted my younger sisters to ask them what characters they preferred to play as in Mario Kart Double Dash, because they used to play a lot of Mario Kart Double Dash. Long story. The results of my inquiry was Toad and Baby Mario. So they chose to play a male character in Toad. And apparently Toad isn't male or female. Toad is just, Toad. Here is a photograph of Jenny Shi, as she holds a Nintendo 64 controller to prove that one time when she was young she held the controller. So this is about a survey after all, so we get into the research section. Inclusion can mean many different things. For the purpose of this research, we provided the following examples to better define inclusion. Though, when you hear about inclusion in video games these days, it's very much a loaded term. That is to say, it's not just about inclusion of anything, like game mechanics, or items, or storylines, or branching paths, or any of that stuff. And I feel like the way that they try and set up the concept of inclusion here, to those who got this survey, is to use the results to attempt to beat the shit out of whatever strawman they can create. I'll explain further in a moment, just compare what the survey says inclusion is to what issues you may have with inclusion in video games. Or at least what is generally understood to be the concept. So inclusion can be many different things for this survey, like being able to customize your character to have a wide range of skin colors and body sizes, stories or plots with culturally diverse characters, healthy and friendly in-game chat experience, offering features that allow those with special needs to play. The issue with the idea of inclusion is that it's extremely contextual, so broad and overarching potentials are listed here in order to paint the idea that inclusion will be pretty much impossible to be against as they define it here. Inclusion is really broad. In fact, it's so broad it's almost to the point where the word is borderline useless. So, much like an extremely poorly worded video essay, ambiguity and lacking of context mean that oftentimes the reader just fills in the spaces with what they're given, with what they're thinking of in their head at the time. Being able to customize your character is generally good, and general audiences don't generally have general issues with it. In general. However, if you were playing a person who was, conscripted into the Wehrmacht in 1944, then giving the player the option to play as a black female trans lesbian Jew wouldn't make any narrative sense in the slightest. That would be dumb. Plus, Games have been doing this stuff for ages now. Character customization isn't anything new. It's never going away. It's going to be an integral part of gaming for as long as I imagine games will go on. Neverwinter Nights let you choose your race and gender because there are only two genders and the rest are glorified moods. That game was from 1991. That's literally older than I am. And there are countless examples of character creation that let you choose skin colors and body sizes since you probably already have a dozen in your heads. Run with those, they work fine. And again, sometimes body sizes don't make sense. If you're playing as a soldier in a war or a ninja sneaking around, it won't make any sense for you to be some obese blob of a person. As for stories and plots with culturally diverse characters, well, damn, that's pretty contextual to whatever setting it is in the game as well. Almost every game now has some kind of setting or world in which it takes place in, so there's only so much stretching that can be done to try and include certain characters. That stretching is noticed by players and pulls many people out of the immersion or undermines the setting that's trying to be sold to those who play the game. As for healthy and friendly in-game chat experiences, this just seems like an excuse for them to crack the whip down on things they don't like. I hear that, and my mind immediately goes to censorship. You can't say that word, you can't make that joke, you can't make that insult, yada yada yada. Almost every game now has some kind of muting or reporting feature anyway. So the idea that even further steps need to be taken when a player has all the tools they need to not hear things they don't like is kind of ridiculous. It's redundant, totally unnecessary. Quite simple. If somebody in a game is giving you grief, you mute them, and you move on with your life. Dear Lord, everybody's gotta be a victim of something now, no matter how incredibly tiny and inconsequential. Listen, this doggo's got 99 problems, and what you take offense to ain't one of them. Alrighty, this last one's a bit odd to see here. Offering features that allow those with special needs to play. So you mean disabled people? Mentally handicapped people? I can't say retard on YouTube anymore. Video game journalists? Those with unusual physical limitations? If we're talking about physical disabilities, like somebody with an abnormal hand condition or maybe somebody who's lost a limb, that's not really an issue with the game, that's more of an issue relating to the peripherals. And I'm a big proponent of there being all kinds of different peripherals out there for all kinds of different people to get their inputs into the game. Back when I used to do PC versus console stuff, I was always saying the PC's great because of all the different kinds of peripherals and setups you can have. As for special needs, meaning like mentally handicapped, do you really want every game to be so accessible that a mentally handicapped person can beat it? What about multiplayer games? How would you even go about doing that? EA is super big on multiplayer. How would you make games where you compete against people online accessible to people with special needs? Even in terms of a single-player game, should games that are known for their challenge and difficulty all be dumbed down to accommodate the least capable among us? Mainly, should the creators of games fear the social justice outrage mob coming for them if their vision is for a game that's difficult and that it's not deemed inclusive enough? But when you ask a normie about stuff like this, well, no doubt they'll run with a nice, squeaky clean version of inclusion that they have in their heads. And that will be used as an excuse by Electronic Arts to try and push in the dirty baggage of social justice inclusion into games when they can. The findings outlined below are from an online survey sent out to US gamers in May of 2018. 2,252 individuals took the survey, ranging from 13 to 54 years old, who own and play video games on console or PC, and who are decision makers in entertainment purchases. Wow, alright, well, like me, you're probably thinking, gosh, 2,252 people, that's not a lot of people at all. Especially when we're trying to extrapolate this kind of survey to gamers as a whole. But let's check a little bit of data to maybe get an idea of what they're trying to do. So according to the Entertainment Software Association, and I'll link this info in the description if you want to take a look, because it's nifty info to have fresh on the brain, it seems that, well, 64% of American households are home to at least one person who plays video games regularly, which they say is 3 hours a week, at least. I think that's pretty low, but alright, sure, fine, I'm down with that. And 60% of Americans play video games daily. And of course, a lot of you might know this is coming, but we can't talk about what is and isn't a gamer without talking about the scourge that is mobile games. According to a new study released by Electronic Entertainment Design and Research, about 67% of Americans, or about 211 million people, play video games on at least one type of device. Their study used a survey of 5,000 people, which is better, that also showed that 90% of those played games on their smartphones, tablets, or both. And I think that Electronic Arts, for the purposes of their surveys and information, definitely wants to include casual phone and tablet tappers as what we would colloquially refer to as gamers. As gamers. What an odd sentence. Personally, I don't think that if all you do is sit around and play Candy Crush while you're waiting for the bus, I don't think that makes you a gamer. I mean, I cook for myself at home. I'm not going to go around telling people, yeah, I'm a cook. I tell people I can cook, I guess. Because you can't hike once in your life and be like, yeah, I'm a hiker. I mean, I walk to the grocery store every other week. That makes me a hiker, right? No, it does not. Even if it's uphill both ways. Point being, I gave them the benefit of the doubt on this one, and depending on what numbers you want to use for the United States population, I used 330 million for ease, and because it's really close to the estimated number. This means that the Electronic Arts survey here on this Medium article surveyed approximately 0.001% of gamers in the country, which is, you could do better. But that is an extremely tiny amount to then extrapolate to all gamers. And I'll wager my immaculately maintained asshole that if Electronic Arts' survey came back and, it turns out they don't give a shit about inclusion at all, it turns out that they don't really like it, there's no way they'd publish this. And what is up with this age range? 13 years old? Who owns and plays games on console and PC, and who are decision makers in entertainment purchases? I mean, look, no offense to the 13-year-olds who might be watching this video, or the 14-year-olds, or the 15-year-olds, but, man, like, I don't care about your opinion if you're 13 years old. I mean, people who are 13 are not exactly renowned for their incredible decision-making capabilities. And I feel like the way that this survey is framed, no wonder they had no issue giving this survey to a 13, a 14, 15, 16-year-old, basically kids, who, by and large, probably won't be able to really think through a lot of this stuff, or whose experiences are kind of colored by their age. I mean, when I'm playing a game online, and one of my teammates opens his mouth, and it's like a 13-year-old, I'm not like, all right, this is good that I have a 13-year-old on my team. I'm like, fuck. He's probably shit, and he'll be annoying, and he won't have a good grasp of tactics or strategy. I mean, it's nothing personal. You're just a little kid. And if the survey is going out to 13 and 14-year-olds, I mean, yeah, they'll say that they play games, but when they're asked if they're decision makers in entertainment purchases, what do you think they're gonna say? Look, I never check my channel demographics. I don't know what percentage of my audience is like 15 and below, but hopefully you have a little self-awareness about your age. Anyway. Key takeaways. The results from this research set the record straight on some common misperceptions about inclusion and representation. Here are some key takeaways. I mean, the simple fact that they word it, set the record straight, is already showing that there's incredible bias here, but it's an Electronic Arts survey. Of course it is. If this information gave them stuff they didn't want to hear, there's no fucking way they would ever produce the results of this survey. Here are some key takeaways. Inclusion is a pressing concern for many players, and backlash comes from a minority. Representation is getting better in the industry, but needs to be authentic. Fixing disruptive behavior and toxicity is more important than ever, and despite having interest in playing games socially, female players face more barriers to playing online multiplayer. Managing disruptive player behavior can help knock down those barriers. It's not much of a barrier then, is it? Anyway, they go to each of these in detail. Let's check it out. It turns out that inclusion isn't just nice to have in-game. In fact, a 56% majority of players say it's important to them that games are inclusive. These players also say that they are more likely to play games that get inclusion right. Look at this question. How important is it for gaming companies to make their games more inclusive towards diverse audiences? And the options were important, neutral, not important. How important? Important. But how important though? Oh, just important. See, when you give those as the only options, of course you'll filter people towards the answer you want them to give. And even then, 44% of people weren't down with what you wanted them to say. And that's incredibly significant that you couldn't lean all those kids into answering into the correct way, huh? If I was a game developer and I was on the fence about adding in a feature or a character, and 44% of my audience that I asked about it said they didn't support it, I would be extremely careful proceeding. Adding in something that 44% of your game's audience doesn't support is something I'd perhaps call a failure of design. And we're not even getting into how incredibly ambiguous and broad this is here, especially since earlier we established that we've extended the vast reach of inclusion to mean so many things. See, gamers want inclusion, the survey creators might say at EA. Oh, yeah, because ultimately, gamers aren't necessarily against the idea of lots of things as long as you don't fuck them up. If anything, video games has taught us that execution is everything. And gamers generally aren't against the idea that games can cater to particular demographics. So they might ask, you want people with disabilities to be able to play video games, right? And we might say, well, yeah, I guess, but it's really more of a peripherals issue. See? Gamers support diversity and inclusion. Haha, take that, goober girders, #resist. What an incredibly leading survey. So if you said, yeah, I'd play a game that had accessibility to those with special needs, then congratulations. Because of this survey and its structure, you are in the same group as people who would play a game because it had customization for diverse ethnic backgrounds. Same thing, right? And if you would play a game because of customization for females and diverse ethnic backgrounds, like, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. But what if it's a World War II game? What if it's a World War I game? What if this is a battle simulator for medieval times? Oh yeah, that's right, I just remembered. If I don't want to see a bunch of trans, black, lesbian, non-binary, genderqueer Jewish divas storming the beaches of Normandy, well then that basically makes me a Nazi. Anyway, this part wraps up by saying, when asked if they would play a game with features such as customization for females and diverse ethnic backgrounds, diverse storytelling from different perspectives, and accessibility to those with special needs, roughly 45% of players report being even more likely to play that game. Now, this is a survey by Electronic Arts, and I seem to remember that not too long ago, they had a particular game come out by the name of Battlefield 5, and that game was a fantastic example of inclusion done just horribly, horribly wrong. Gamers were chastised and mocked and insulted by the devs and EA themselves because, hey, if you don't think that a face paint wearing disabled cyborg women fought on the British front lines in World War II, then you just need to fucking educate yourself. Well, instead of educating myself, I spent my money elsewhere, and it turns out that I wasn't the only one. EA's flagship for inclusion took a huge hit, definitely a low point for the series. The game is the first Battlefield game to miss the NPD's top 10 this decade. The internet is full of the news about just how poorly the game sold compared to other Battlefield games. How very strange it is that this survey would release shortly after the news of the disappointing Battlefield sales had sat in the public eye. Almost as if they're trying to really push the narrative, despite all reality, that inclusion sells video games. Almost as if they're trying to save face? Representation is getting better in the industry, but needs to be authentic. Well, I mean, there's more of it. Is it better? Does it make sense in the game? After all, we live in a world where multiplayer games set during World War II allow you to play as a female black Nazi. Very progressive. Oh, but don't show any swastikas. Why would you have a swastika in a World War II game? That just makes no sense. The good news is that our research shows over half of players report seeing more diverse audiences represented in video games within the past 2 years. In their own words, before inclusion was defined, they mention features such as more options in character customization to help people feel unique, such as adding quirks and physical nuances to characters' teeth, or being able to create characters who look biracial. It just seems odd that they wouldn't even define inclusion, then decide to put it into the survey about inclusion, and I guess the question that they asked was, in the past 2 years, have you seen more diverse audiences represented? And they're like, yeah, I can make my teeth look all fucked up. I don't understand with this biracial thing. You've been able to make brown, mocha, chocolate, frappuccino characters for ages now. Like, this is a thing that spans back further than I can even remember. If games don't have this option, it's considered weird. Why even bring this up? This is like a standard staple of character customization. In fact, this whole segment seems really unnecessary. They're just saying these are things that we've seen the last 2 years, which is like a duh thing to people who play video games. Like, yeah, we know. A lot of this stuff is just, like, standard. Let's take a look at some quotes. In The Sims, you could give your character a gap between their teeth. I have that, and was happy to see myself represented. Okay then. Freak. Dragon Age lets me play as a female character, yet still respected, and the game has good examples of strong female characters. Yeah, we've had female characters that are on par with male characters for years and years and years now. This isn't even new. And what is this odd fascination with strong female characters? There's nothing wrong with a female being strong. Oh my god, what the fuck is this? Dragon Age Let Us Me Play. Let Us Me Play? Jenny Shi from Electronic Arts, come on. At least pretend you give a shit. What the fuck is this, amateur hour? My son is biracial, and he can choose his player from a variety of skin tones and hair textures in NBA 2K. Wow, a basketball game where you can play as a brown person. What will they think of next? While it was minor, a side quest in The Witcher 3 featured a gay character. As a gay man, these types of stories, as simple as they may be, are important to me. Don't tell us why or anything. I mean, I'm bisexual and I didn't give a shit. But I know the quest you're talking about. Part of the quest, The Beast of White Orchard. You have to talk to Mislav. Mislav says, the Lord's son, Florian, and I, we loved each other. The Dieter walked in on us in the stables. They drove me away. Florian hanged himself. Lord started drinking, and the estate fell into ruin. That's the long and short of it. Ah yes, male player, 19 years old. It's important to know that in a world as often cruel and callous as The Witcher's, misery and disaster is just as applicable to the gays as to the straights. That's weird. I'm bisexual, and when I heard this, I was just like, gosh, Mislav, quite the tragedy there. I'll add that to the pile of sob stories I've heard today. I'm here about a griffin. Despite the notable increase in representation, many players stress that diversity and inclusion shouldn't simply be a checkbox for game developers, and that it should come from a genuine place. And this was unironically written by the company that brought you Mass Effect Andromeda and Battlefield 5. For example, many female players say they want to see female characters have just as in-depth of stories and look like real women, not just eye candy. Wow, a few things. Firstly, they do have just as in-depth stories. What an odd thing to say in a survey. Secondly, this isn't a gender issue. I mean, it's not an issue at all. It's a non-issue that weenies care about. Both males and females are portrayed as stereotypical or fantasized in video games. Guys are handsome, well-spoken, hunky, strong, studly Adonises. Women are buxom, beautiful, confident, alluring, and everything in between. Both men and women cover the spectrum of attractiveness. But people generally want to look at attractive characters. And since this is something that players generally want, it's something that's generally presented. Shocking. Try to wrap your head around that one. There's plenty of ugly and moderate-looking characters in video games. I mean, dear God, there's tons of them. As one player said in the survey, make it so that you can choose a character's gender and have them be equal to the male characters in terms of story significance. Maybe the character that you chose just doesn't have as much impact in a story than another. Maybe that character doesn't look like you, maybe it does, could go either way. Depends on whatever creative vision a developer has, and if anything, that should be respected above all else. There's nothing wrong with creating a world where men and women are seen and valued differently, or there's some kind of in-universe prejudice to be explored. From a narrative standpoint, if you're trying to recreate certain time periods, for instance, then having everybody viewed the same despite their gender, race, sexuality, birth status, nationality, religion, that would be kind of weird. It would be oddly harmonious. Are you saying that every playable character has to have the same level of importance in a story, regardless of everything else? I mean, a character can only be one color and one gender, so everything that the protagonist isn't... are all non-protagonists marginalized? That's almost like saying that, yeah, black people haven't had as much impact in the history of the United States as white people, but I'm black and I feel like black should be equally represented in history books as whites. It's like saying, yeah, white people didn't have much impact in the history of Egypt, but I'm white and I want to see myself represented despite what the story really is. Imagine coming up with a story and you have multiple characters and somebody out there says, hey, your black character doesn't have as much of an interesting story as your white character. Maybe you, as the creator, tried to write them the same. Maybe most would disagree and say that they are indeed written about the same, but woe to you, O developer, when the social justice Twitter mobs descend upon you over sheer accusations that somebody out there feels like the backstory of one fake person who happens to share some physical characteristic with a player whines on social media. Then again, this whole point is kind of ridiculous from the start, since almost every single game that allows you to choose your gender of your character makes them completely level in a statistical sense. The only differences are usually just aesthetic ones. Players don't want to be penalized by getting a watered-down version of a role or story for choosing to play someone who looks like them. You know, reading this at the end made me wonder, did the numbnuts who take this survey think that if you play a character who's, I don't know, female or brown or gay or something, that the developers who made the game are just like changing the story and narrative just out of spite when otherwise they'd be the same? Like there are entire quest lines and things to do and explore within the story, but, oh, you chose a character with this shade of skin color, so you just don't get this quest. It doesn't exist for you in this playthrough. I mean, there are narrative reasons why in a game setting, characters with certain attributes or characteristics could be treated differently and have different experiences. But the way that this survey frames it, it's almost like they're trying to say people who make video games are, what, prejudiced? Some female players also mentioned the need for a variety of functionality and roles, as they may prefer healing their teammates or defending a point, as opposed to attacking, killing, or shooting, which have been the more standard ways to win in games since, well, forever. Some female players also mention as they may prefer. What an incredibly ambiguous, non-committal statement in what's supposed to be the results of a survey. Some female players may prefer something. How many? 5%? 10? 20? How many females? And even then, they may prefer it. So they don't necessarily prefer it, but they may. Some females may prefer it. What a useless bit of rubbish to put in a survey. The whole point of the survey is to find out how many people say what things. Anyway, attacking other players is the entire basis for an uncountable number of video games. Many games are based around the idea of combat. As the article says, it's been the standard way to win in games since forever. You use strategy or tactics or skill to outplay your opponents. That's competition. And in addition to that, there's an incredibly vast array of games that include support and healing roles already. So I guess they're saying that some mysterious amount of female players might possibly, but not necessarily, want more healing and defensive roles in video games. Sure, some games can be improved, maybe, by adding these roles. It's very contextual to the game and what the developers are trying to create, but I fail to see how this relates to inclusion in any meaningful way. And then it sorta dawned on me. Because I'm a sane, reasonable doggo, it didn't pop out at first. But these kinds of people are traffickers in identity politics and social justice. It's like they exist in a separate, alternate reality, and their clown world logic is being transported here to our reality using their mouths as conduits. I know why this is in the survey, and it actually makes lots of sense if you don't think about it. When you start talking about variety of functionality and roles, and standard ways to win in games, what you're doing is talking about some of the fundamental aspects of video games. Win conditions and how you go about winning. By shifting these things, you're essentially making different games. This paragraph here might be absolutely ridiculous. The one big reason is that it's essentially saying that games need to change so that more females might be interested in playing them. Why? Because. I mean, there's not really a reason. Other than diversity, and diversity is its own justification, right? More women is good because it just is. That's what social justice does. Social justice finds something that it hasn't invaded yet, and infects it, and attempts to ruin it or completely change what it is so that it's more inclusive to people. People who have always been welcome to join the whole time but chose not to, for whatever reasons they want. So fuck it. Games need to change so more women might play them. They just do, because reasons. And if you enjoyed that thing, then sorry, your hobby was bad, your hobby was wrong, and you're probably a disgusting misogynist for liking it in the first place. Black Player 30 years old says, have more characters of color that are not side or comedic characters. Give them meaningful arcs and contribution to the story without dying or shunted to the side. Yeah, because arcs don't involve death, guys. You can't have a character die as part of their arc. Self-sacrifice, heroism, the giving up of one's own life for their principles or to protect the things they love. Nah, fuck it. Dying is shit. And if a character dies, then they can't be the right kind of hero for this mongoloid brainlet. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Tony Stark, Spock, Groot, Boromir, the Iron Giant, Data, fucking Baymax? Nope, not the right kind of heroes. After all, heroic and courageous acts of self-sacrifice, totally lame. And I guess it's good things that these are all, fictional heroes, because we can't have actual black people who are heroes that we can all look up to. We have to have fictional, made-up characters that can be our examples. So to hell with John Robert Fox and Ralph Henry Johnson and Reuben Rivers and... sorry, I had to stop there for a moment since these are all men who are Medal of Honor recipients, and reading through their stories, I was getting really teary-eyed. And then that tear turned into a bald eagle and flew away into the sunset. God, I love this country. Fixing disruptive behavior and toxicity is more important than ever. While representation has been getting better, our research tells us that players perceive that behavior and toxicity management have not improved much. Many of us who have played an online multiplayer game or mode will know that it's not uncommon to experience trolling or worse from other players. Oh no, worse than trolling, yeah. Our research reveals that 3 out of 5 players are concerned with toxicity, in the form of abusive chat, hate speech, sexism, or racism in gaming, and that toxicity is only second to the top concern, which is game quality. Yeah, EA, people are really concerned about the game quality of the games that you publish, because you got a lot of stinkers. But hey, now that I remind myself that you asked a bunch of 13, 14, and 15-year-olds this kind of thing, yeah, I can see how toxicity might be on their mind. It sounds to me like you should be focusing on game quality. And what's this? Half of them say big publishers monopolizing the industry is very or somewhat concerning? Oh, that's rich. Electronic Arts? Video games now have all kinds of tools to monitor and report toxic behavior. If someone is being annoying with their voice, you mute them. If they say nasty things in text, you block them or you turn off the chat. You can report people with in-game features. Eventually, you get to the point where all the tools are available for you to help yourself. Yeah, help yourself. I know that's a foreign concept to some people these days, that they take just a teeny tiny eensy-weensy little bit of initiative to solve their own problems. And then, you reach a point where the cure is worse than the disease. Fuck it, ban people for anything. Say something somebody found offensive in a moment of rage, well, say goodbye to your account and all the games that you have. Told somebody they need to step up their game because they're shitty? Well, that's bullying. Make fun of somebody who made fun of you? Well, then I guess it's just down to who gets reported the most. It's not about having a tough skin in a competitive environment. It's not about getting better at the game so you can hold your performance over their insults. No, no, no. It's about making sure that massive corporations and video game developers baby you like a child. Because you're so thin-skinned, some random nobody on the other side of the country can bring you to emotional trauma because he called you a faggot. You know what made me a better person? Learning to take insults. Learning to give as much as I got. Being told I was shit, so I worked harder to be better. You know what makes me crack now? Nothing. You can't touch me with your petty insults. Your words have no power over me. I won't collapse like a lemon-flavored jelly donut because you said a slur. I'm an adult, goddammit. And if playing Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 on Xbox Live as a puppy taught me anything, it's that heartbeat sensors are for pussies, and there's nothing you can say that will save you from my helicopter gunner kill streak. Man, that game was garbage. I guess the point here is that we should encourage gamers to empower themselves instead of having other people moderate our online experiences for us. You know what I think is interesting? If you look down here at the bottom, it says representation of all gender, culture, and ages. 40% are concerned. Quality and sequel quality are the 1 and 2 answers. Toxicity often lends itself to the in-game mechanics of whatever experience you're having online. Lack of single-player games, DLC, microtransactions. It's odd that so much effort is being paid towards toxicity, when really it's probably the aspect that EA has the least amount of actual control over. But things like the quality of games, the quality of sequels, the lack of good content, the lack of games that have single player, microtransactions, DLC, accessibility, violence, almost all of this they have direct control over. But toxicity's the focus. Alright, I suppose if it's topical for this survey, just seems like a lot of work to go through, you know? Maybe you should focus on making good games first, with non-crappy business models. Now, they note underneath it, apart from players feeling concerned about toxicity, disruptive player behavior is also flat out ruining the game experience for some people. 14% of players report they stopped enjoying a game due to an unfriendly community. Unfortunately, I think a reality of online games that's kind of intrinsic to the whole schmagagel here is that if you're in games and people want to be nasty, if they want to manifest their displeasure, they will find a way to do that. As long as you have text, as long as you have chat, as long as you have human interaction over the internet, especially in video games where there's a competitive environment, people will come up with ways to just be an asshole. And if you're a player, there's nothing you can do about the other people, but there is something you can do about yourself. Make steely your nerves, learn control over your emotions, and empower yourself. The rest of this chart doesn't surprise me. Video games as a hobby isn't for everybody. And hell, even within the hobby, every kind of video game isn't for every kind of person. Just like literally every hobby, it's not for everybody. Not everybody is going to like it. Not everybody is going to even prefer it. And that's okay. In fact, that's good. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't really give a shit what non-gamers think about gaming. In the same way that professional bowlers probably don't really care about my opinion on bowling. So if somebody who isn't really into gaming and doesn't like or enjoy video games tells me that I don't like it because they're unfriendly player community, or it's too difficult, or I'm not confident in my skills, or there's too many buttons on the controller. Okay, then go play a hobby that you enjoy. Don't try and fuck around with my shit because you don't like it. I mean, what? 11% of people don't enjoy video games in general because they're too violent. Is Electronic Arts trying to tell me that we need to go out of our way to change games and make them less violent so that 11% of people might be more interested in them? I don't know, Electronic Arts is just in it for the money. Maybe they'd be happy to do that if it gets more money in their pockets. They don't give a shit about the artistic creativity of the games or the creative vision of the developers. Look, and I know money doesn't grow on trees and you can't do everything that you want. I know we live in the real world and we need publishers like EA. At least I think so. Maybe I'm wrong. At least for funding certain kinds of games with certain kinds of budgets. But surely there's like a happy medium in between, the health of the industry and the fairness to the people who prop it up, the consumers, and making lots of money. Despite having interest in playing games socially, female players face more barriers to playing online multiplayer. Managing disruptive player behavior can help knock down those barriers. Yes, women are weak and fragile and they're emotionally unstable, and we just can't expect women to perform in the same competitive environment that men do every day. Women just don't have what it takes. We have to change other people's behavior for the women. Women aren't tough, they don't have thick skins, they don't have the competitive spirit that men do. They're not willing to push themselves to succeed in the face of adversity. No, that's something that men do. Women don't do that. I hope that the sarcasm has sunk in well enough at this point. The people who actually want to empower and respect women, they're not the people who make surveys like this. I mean, guys get harassed more online than women do, but, well, they're men and no one gives a fuck about men. Fuck men. Men are worthless scum. But remember, feminism is about equality. So fuck men's problems. Online harassment, disruptive player behavior. Men have been dealing with this shit for over 20 years in online multiplayer games now. But God forbid this ubiquitous online phenomena occurs to someone with a vagina. Well, that is absolutely unacceptable and something must be done. Well, it looks like men and women equally like to play with friends and family in person. I'm assuming this is couch co-op or hot seat or split screen. You guys remember Hot Seat, right? Oh man, Worms World Party, Civilization 4, those were the days. Anyway, once we move online to a more competitive and less personal space like online gaming, the differences become obvious. They like to play online less, they like to play with strangers less, and they like to play in a real team of players less. And that makes sense to me. In fact, I think it would be very unusual if the opposite results were reported. Women generally, and holy fuck, I literally don't care about, well, my little niece Nancy sure does love to play volleyball. I don't care about your anecdotal example. So don't even make it. Individual outliers do not disprove generalities. The general trend seems to be that women are less interested in competition in competitive environments and risk-taking in general. They're less aggressive. So it makes sense that in a very competitive and very non-personal environment that often deals with violence and stakes, women would generally be less likely to engage in that as much as men do. And I don't see how that's a bad thing. Men and women prefer different things. I don't go around advocating that areas dominated by women need to change themselves so that men get more interested. When you get the unholy trifecta of men competing anonymously online, then yeah, women aren't going to be as interested in that. Many are, of course, and many do, and there's nothing stopping them from doing that. It's just a general preference. Toxicity impairs some audiences more than others. While female players game with others in person just as much as male players, they don't play much socially online, especially when there is any risk of playing with strangers. Looking at some of their reasons for this, many of them cite bad behavior and toxicity from other players. A lot of strangers had sexual and disparaging remarks when they heard I was a female on voice chat. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. There are jerks out there on the internet. You have the ability to block and mute them, so you don't have to listen to them anymore. I suggest you take advantage of those tools at your disposal. If you play online with strangers and use voice chat, you can encounter some toxicity. Yeah. You can. I stay away from multiplayer games because I get paired up with those far superior than me, and it's not fun for either of us. Yeah, get good. I wasn't playing online because of fears of just being harassed and left out. Wait a second, these last three don't have anything to do with specifically women. Those are things that anybody's gonna encounter. Oh, there might be a toxic environment. Oh, I'm not that good and I could get paired up with people who are way better than me. Or I might get harassed and I might get left out. These aren't women things. These are just things. These are game things. Not video game things, but all game things. That's just life. That's just people in sports on the daily. Man, some people just aren't cut out for these competitive environments. And if that's the case, then don't go into competitive environments. It's not for everybody. Video games aren't for everybody. No hobby is for everybody. Now, there are plenty of games that are purely cooperative and very casual, but if you're going to enter into an online competitive environment, then there are going to be repercussions of that due to simple human nature. There comes a time when you have to tell yourself, maybe this hobby just isn't for me. I mean, maybe I just can't handle it. Or maybe I'm playing the wrong games with the wrong crowd, because video games are so diverse. Maybe you should seek different genres and environments. Female players, on average, face significantly more barriers to enjoying a video game. Some of their top barriers mirror the top barriers of all players, notably game difficulty and unfriendly player community. Oh, so the females are the same as men in that regard. Okay. Distinctively, female players are 2 times more likely than their male counterparts to feel less confident when playing. Adding in the fact that female players feel deterred to play online multiplayer, it becomes a vicious cycle. When they experience toxic behavior from other players, they avoid playing and become less confident in their skills because they have fewer welcoming opportunities to play in the first place. Females and males both have barriers to any hobby. The practice that's required to train, to become more and more competent at that hobby, the ability to handle criticism in a competitive environment or to shrug off mocking from opposition or angry teammates, your ability to internalize your confidence, things like that, they all exist for both of the genders. But we know that the genders handle things differently than each other. And as we've established, and as science has demonstrated, men aren't women, women aren't men. They're just different. But there's nothing in gaming environments, even competitive ones, that are actually preventing women from competing or flourishing. That's why we have to back things up and talk about generalities when we have a study like this. That's why childcare providers are 94% women, and why home health care providers are 89% women, why social services workers are 85% women. Women generally prefer and cope with things in different ways than men. And that's fine. Individually, nobody is holding a woman back from playing video games competitively online, and nobody's holding back a man from being a child care provider. What we see is just the results of general preferences. To those players who don't play multiplayer, the survey asked which, if any, would make you reconsider playing online multiplayer games. I find this a little interesting. A third of both male and female survey participants who, if you remember, are aged as low as 13, 14, and 15, say that reducing disruptive or toxic behavior would make them reconsider playing multiplayer games online. So this doesn't seem to be a gendered issue, for at least this immediate question. And what I find interesting as well are the massive divides between the genders when it comes to limiting violence in games and limitation on microtransactions. And even though over a fifth of males who answered the survey said they'd reconsider playing online multiplayer games if they removed microtransactions, something tells me, and I just got this odd feeling, that Electronic Arts isn't exactly going to rush to change games to get these people back into the multiplayer scene by removing microtransactions. Anyway, what I pull from this part of the survey is that there's simply a segment of the population that doesn't like the idea of what online multiplayer inherently is, which makes online multiplayer games exactly like every other hobby that exists. There are people who don't like snowboarding because they hate the cold. There are people who hate surfing because they don't like the ocean. There gets to a point with hobbies that you have to start fundamentally changing what it is in order to just garner in more potential paying customers. Is there merit to the idea that some games, some gamers, can be too toxic? That some people out there can be just too nasty and too offensive and too cruel? Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've spent countless hours on virtual battlefields and internet arenas, and there's definitely some people out there who are just horrible awful and should definitely be restricted from playing games with others. But I've always had the tools to solve my problems myself when those people arrive, and I've had to learn to deal with difficult people. And I wouldn't really want it any other way. I can take care of myself. Just give me the tools to do so. So here we are, wrapping up. We're almost there, everybody. Arming game developers of all sizes with these insights can give them the conviction to thoughtfully consider how to make games more inclusive for everyone. Oh, what about Nazis? What about all those alt-right boogeymen out there? Ooh, spooky. Should we make games more inclusive for them? You know, the more you think about it, it's almost like inclusion isn't a very stable principle from which to build something on top of, huh? It's really only inclusion for the kinds of people we want. It's still selective at the end of the day. And I still don't think we've really got a firm grasp on why it is that inclusion is so very, very important, though I could make my guesses here and there. There's a cynical side of me that says when it comes to Electronic Arts, the more people that they can include in the pool of potential paying customers, well, you know. We hear loud and clear that the majority of players consider inclusion an important factor that can influence their decision to play a game, but there is still so much to understand about disruptive behavior and toxicity. That is certainly one way to interpret the data that you got from 13-year-olds, alright? These are quite the questions to be asking to people so young, so easy to be influenced. Let's skip to the end. Above all, politics and social movements aside, my hope is that gaming should be for everyone. So let's all do what we can to create game experiences that are inclusive to all. And that's really the issue here, isn't it? The person who's in charge of this is someone who says that gaming should be for everyone. And I fundamentally disagree. At a core level, I completely disagree with the idea that anything should be for everyone. Because if something is for everyone, then what is it really? Especially when we talk about hobbies. It's one thing if we're talking about concepts or values, but when we're talking about a hobby, a physical hobby, games that are played, how can that be for everyone? Is gaming for my grandmother and my grandfather? Is it for my mother and father? Is it for infants? Is it for... really? Everyone? Hobbies aren't for everybody. Hobbies are for certain kinds of people who have interests in certain kinds of things. Think for a moment about your favorite game. BioShock, Mass Effect, Dark Souls, The Witcher, Soma, Hellblade, whatever your favorite game in the world is. Now imagine that game if it was designed for everybody. If it was designed to be inclusive to every person. If no matter your preferences or your desires or your personal tastes, that game was made for you. What would that game look like? I mean, I don't know. Not for sure. I haven't the foggiest. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that they'd probably be terrible. They'd certainly not really be anything like what you know and love about them. I mean, imagine Dark Souls, but extremely easy and super accessible. Imagine Soma, but without all the philosophical questions about one's personhood. Imagine Witcher without the violence or the depictions of racism or sexism in the societies. What do you have after that? Some inoffensive, dull, bland, milquetoast video game about... Well, I mean, it's not really a game at that point. A game implies there's input involved, and that requires some level of effort and skill, and we don't want to have a game that's too hard or difficult for people. I mean, it's almost like part of the intrinsic nature of video games is both inclusive and exclusionary, kind of at the same time, but in their own different ways. Just like every hobby that has ever existed. Video games present us with a set of rules that, no matter who you are, no matter your color or ethnicity or your religion or your political stance or your nationality or your gender, you have to all come together in cooperation voluntarily and agree to abide by those same rules. And then at that point, well, then the competition begins. And I say let the best gamer win. Ultimately, competition is a contest. And not everybody enjoys partaking in that struggle, that battle, that fray. And when you try too hard to change what people enjoy for the sake of hopefully getting more people into the party, you'll very likely find that the medicine is far, far worse than the disease. Maybe Electronic Arts? Instead of focusing so much attention on inclusion, you should probably work on what gamers really do care about. The quality of your video games.